welcome to my channel. So I wanted to follow on a little bit from the video that I did, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where I was talking about quantum physics in relation to the everyone is pushed out journey, or the creation journey. I find it really fascinating because I do find it really fascinating that scientists seem to talk about this stuff a lot, especially in quantum physics and physics, and yet they don't seem to suggest any lifestyle changes. So you get people talking all the time about how their thoughts create their environment, yet they never go on to say, so maybe it's a good idea to change your thoughts, or maybe if you think something differently inside, you're going to create that. It seems very separate. It's like the spiritual community very rarely talk about science, and the science community sort of talk about all these theories, but then don't put them into any kind of applicable way into their actual life experiences. Of course, there might be some, I don't want to say nobody, but I yet come across the channels that kind of combine the two. I'm definitely not going to be one of those right now because I've only really started looking into quantum physics like 3 days ago. However, I did have an interest in it right back at the beginning, when I was really on a very strong, like a lot of people would call it twin flame journey. I don't know what to label it, but that kind of experience. And I don't really have crazy pulls to people anymore, but I did back then. And I looked into quantum entanglement a little bit because I started to see that there was a correlation in quantum entanglement in physics of how two particles across space and time could think something or shift in some way, and they would affect the other person across time and space without words or coming into contact with one another. So that's how I first got into quantum physics, but then didn't really go any further until recently, when I've been thinking about everyone is pushed out, and how, you know, the possibilities of what we're experiencing here in the world, and how our mind creates and how we interact with one another. I'm still definitely in the early stages, but I kind of want to start putting out my thoughts, because, you know, we can always bounce off one another, and I just like it. I find it enjoyable. So I'm going to publish the article in the video, but this I found very interesting. The observer effect in quantum mechanics indicates that the quantum wave function collapses when an observation is made by an observer. It is a consequence of the traditional Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics. Under this interpretation, does that mean that there must be an observer in place from the beginning of time? Does this prove a need for God's existence, so that his act of observing the universe would bring it into being? This was how they were talking about, you know, the reason for there being a God was because somebody was obviously making an observation which was allowing the other sort of potentials to fall away and to continue down sort of one timeline. The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics suggests that as the system unfolds, its physical state is defined by its quantum wave function. This quantum wave function describes the probabilities of all possible configurations into the system, At the point when a measurement is made, the wave function at that point collapses into a single state, a process called decoherence of the wave function. This is best exemplified in the thought experiment and paradox of Schrödinger's cat, which is both alive and dead at the same time until an observation is made. So this form of quantum physics to me very much describes the idea of us having multiple thoughts, trains of experience, potentials. Like every second there's infinite possibilities, right? For the next second, it's like Schrödinger's cat, like was it alive or dead? What's going to happen tomorrow is based on so many possibilities and variables. But what it's saying is that by observation, so that would be by placing consciousness upon one of those realities or one of those thought processes in each moment, then we would basically collapse all the other options and keep that one train of thought and turn it into like an ongoing timeline, right? So this would mean that this is why when we react to our current situation, or we react to our current timeline, or we engage in our current timeline, we're keeping it alive because we're observing it, we're staying as part of the process. And this is why to shift timelines or to change, you have to stop observing it to a degree. And you then have to not react to it, not give it that energy charge, not give it focus. Energy goes where focus flows, right? We know that. Whatever you're focused on, that's what starts to build. So if you stop giving it focus, and focus can be from like a good or bad, there's no good or bad, but reacting to something is also keeping it as a focus, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're thinking negatively or positively. If you're focused on it, then you're going to bring it into your reality in the way that you focus in. And this would very much be in line with the Copenhagen method in quantum physics. So then we get to the point of like you as the God, as the creator, making the choice. So the way that I see it, I'm going to have to go back a bit because I've made notes. But the things, like some of this has to come in line with my own experiences as well. Like I've had a number of spiritual experiences where I have had memories of things that didn't happen. I've sort of had glitches in the matrix. I felt myself shift timelines, yet the timeline's very similar, which to me would sort of suggest that perhaps it wasn't the case that there is only one linear timeline, and as all of the possibilities collapse because we stop focusing on them, that we are all just going down this linear timeline. I mean, it comes to mass consciousness, it's going to get really disjointed because that's where my head is right now. But I had a very clear vision that I've put in one of my other videos of like I went somewhere really deep and I saw the center of consciousness and how consciousness began. And it was infinite, absolutely unlimited ability to create, but to the point where it was crazy overwhelming, and I then understood why humans would want to experience limitation, to have experiences, which is what I was showing was the main purpose of life, just to have experiences. And where am I going with my train of thought? So I was shown that we were here to have these experiences. So that's right. So then obviously there's lots of truth in the Bible. You know, man was made in the form of God. So there's this one center of creation that all it does is create. And it's created all these others. It's split off into many other mini creational vortexes that are all made in the image of that one. So that gives us all that same power when we become God realized, right? So at that point, we have to question that we're here doing this, so we're collapsing other options. So even though I believe that all these realities continue to exist or continue to remain as possibilities, there does seem to be some form of the consciousness choosing a timeline. And I'm not sure the others collapse because, like I said, I've had some weird experiences, and people have had things like the Mandela effect, and I've had some weird experiences of memories that didn't happen or change in the past, which is obviously easy to do because nothing is fixed, so everything is present. So if you change the now, then you're also directly influencing the future and the past. I think it was Einstein who said that. My physics knowledge is bad. So it could be that they don't all exist, but you're just changing your memories and your past ones based on your current, or there's a possibility that they all exist as possibilities, but they're kind of like held in suspended animation, or like they're not active until your focus goes towards them. And then it's sort of, that's a timeline. But then there is also this possibility that you have this oversoul. So you're there and you're sort of making these decisions, but then there's this oversoul that kind of looks at the whole of itself. So yeah, this is where we need to move into quantum physics, right? Because we're all these little mini creators, all in the form of the one creator, and everything we do affects the other little mini creators. So if I'm like, I want people to buy my art, and I believe people are going to buy my art, someone is going to feel the calling to be, oh, I need to go and buy some of Sarah's art. So we're all interacting with each other constantly. And, you know, some of the things then that we do, if we're all individuals and we're not literally living in a holographic world or aligning to other realities, is we're going to be doing the same thing. So, you know, we're going to feel, I do feel like I've been manifested. I mean, I know a lot of people say that's not true and that can't happen and everyone is pushed out, but I do actually feel like I've been manifested. And, you know, it happens like a lot where you have an experience and you kind of, like, there's a girl, I think I've said this story, I have a friend, and I don't know if she's like gotten over this, but we haven't ran into this problem because we've been in COVID for so long, but she would have a massive trigger with people being late, and every time I would go and meet this friend, I would be so late. It didn't matter if I tried to leave an hour early or did anything that I tried, because, you know, literally the train would like miss the stop, or there'd always be some crazy reason why I'd be so late, like an hour late. Oh, my programs are just sort of popping up. So there'd always be this almost outside influence. And that's the thing, is like when somebody puts out a thought, you can't help but conform to it, the same as, you know, the other way around. It's like we're all here interacting with each other and we're all like thinking and doing things that are affecting the other particles across time and space, you know, which is why you can put something out and then it comes to you. Now, are we doing that and we're just connecting to those versions of those people because there's infinite possibilities that kind of lay dormant, but when we bring our consciousness, they kind of like spring up, you know, or there's a thing that everybody's a hologram, but I'm not really buying into everybody being a hologram. I do believe we're all kind of split from the one and we all have our own consciousness, but that's only my belief. And, you know, when it comes to physics, you shouldn't really have any beliefs. But then there's also the possibility that we're all kind of interacting with one another, but then this oversoul kind of has the highest say. So we're doing our thing and we're creating our realities, but then there is this kind of like oversoul that sees all of us together as mini creators, and it kind of like structures it in some way. So all these things are possible, right? I mean, if it's the Copenhagen method, or if it's the method that we're all interacting with one another through like quantum entanglement and our thoughts and actions are affecting one another, then the kind of Kabbalion would be real, really, that it was who had the sort of strongest belief or was the most God realized that would kind of have power and control over its other fragments, right? Then if we go down the multiverse avenue, then every time a new thought would be created or one action, then it would just split off. So there'd be infinite realities. And then we wouldn't have to worry about anyone having any power over us whatsoever, because we would just split off a new reality. With all of these things, this is why you can't get angry with other people, because they are, I mean, Neville says, I'm sure Neville has a lecture where he talks about how if you get angry at somebody, you're getting angry with the role that you've been given. He seemed to think that people had roles until they became God realized, and then they kind of had free will. This resonates a lot for me because I had like some spiritual connections, and there was just no physical way I had any choice whatsoever. Like I'd have this massive pulling to them. I couldn't, you know, I had so much spiritual growth through them. There was no one else that I could look at. And even with my career, I felt like there was just no way I could do anything else. I felt in my early years very fixed. Like I didn't feel like I really had free will from waking up until I sort of came into the understanding that I was the creator of my reality. I always felt like I was like being pulled around, like pulled so hard to like some connection, and I'd be feeling all the emotions, and it was literally like a physical energy pull. So, you know, I could resonate with Neville on that, that I feel that we perhaps come here with set roles or set things that we want to work through. My kind of belief is that we have set energetic triggers, or we have patterns, and once we've kind of worked through them and we've understood ourselves to be God realized, that we then have free will and we have free run, and we can just create as and when. I don't feel tied to anything or anyone anymore. I feel like I have a choice. Obviously I still, you know, feel connections and things that I'm drawn to, but I don't have that same feeling like I'm just trapped in something that I used to have. And that really came with me stepping into my understanding as a creator and healing and clearing, if you want to call it, all those blocks and that resistance. And people don't really like the word wounds, do they? But it felt like I kind of shifted through those wounds. And I think Neville says, you know, don't be angry at people for performing a role that you gave them, which is very true. And I think he has a reference to a cinema ticket where somebody steals something, but that means that he ends up, I can't remember it word for word, but he ends up getting the tickets that he desires and the top seats, and he doesn't pay for them. But if he'd have got angry at that criminal at the time, then, you know, he wouldn't be understanding that he'd already put out that he wanted the free cinema tickets, and that was the way that he was going to get them. So that guy, that criminal, was performing a role for him to get what he wanted, what he'd put out and desired for. And this is very much it, that, you know, what we ask for has to be brought to us in a way. So if that means somebody doing something, we can't then be angry. It's why we don't react in the middle too. Like if you ask, that's why I like to set personally now, like longer term things, like really big things, and otherwise sort of just try and have like the flow and be non-reactional. Because if you ask for too many little things, you kind of lose track. Whereas if you have sort of a bigger thing, or work at one thing at a time, then you can let things go easier and you can just live in the end. Because by reacting to something that might seem completely unrelated, you might be holding your thing away. Because if you're like, well, I want this specific person, then that's when I believe you go into listening mode and you go into your intuition and you become non-reactional and you live in the end. Because some of the ways the bridge of incidences can sort of seem to be going the opposite or take you away from it. But, you know, as long as you stay living in the end, that's all you need to do. You know, if for example, the easiest bridge of incidences for you to be with your specific person might be that you meet somebody else and like you meet a new friend, and then they happen to be like mutual, and then you end up at the same place. You know, there's all kinds of ways. But if you don't kind of go into your listening mode and you don't have that intuition to go along with that offer that comes along, then you're just constantly delaying this thing in the end, because you're not kind of allowing the bridge of incidences to unfold. So you're having to start it off again like every time. So I haven't got any more notes here. I mean, I've definitely felt myself shift timelines a lot within this timeline. So it does make me feel like we're a lot more multidimensional than just all possibilities being there and then us collapsing them down into one timeline. The same with like mass consciousness. I mean, election's a really good one. Obviously with the election, yes, we can, like, say with COVID, we can all have completely different experiences. Like right now you could be in Sweden, it would be having very little effect. Yeah, it's going on, but you could easily be a person in Sweden that doesn't have to conform with any of it, right? And we can all be having incredibly different experiences under the same umbrella of COVID. Election's a little bit different because, you know, if everybody's on the same timeline, then we would all, even though our experience would be different, we'd all have the same president or the same, can't even remember my own country's prime minister. How did I forget that word? Sometimes you just forget like really simple, stupid words. And that would be where, you know, it would be if we were to choose a prime minister or choose a president, then for us all to have our experience, we would have to divide off, right? Unless there was like an oversoul that took the kind of collective mass consciousness reading and then collapsed timelines to that one in favor. I mean, there's always infinite possibilities. Whatever's going on, something is being either put into like time space freeze, and then we're just carrying on that timeline unless we shift, or shift our consciousness into it, or we're all kind of here together collectively. And on things like that, there's some, I mean, something that I will say is that I recently found there's this book called 1900 or The Last President, and it's super fascinating. It talks about like the last president, and this was written 127 years ago, and the last president is called Trump, and then it goes into the adventures of Baron Trump, and he finds a time machine, and he's got connections with Tesla, which in real life, I'm not going to go into this in this video because then it will drag on forever, but you can go and Google all this stuff and go down the same rabbit hole that I have. You'll see that Tesla was working on a time machine, and this is in real life. So in real life, Tesla was working on a time machine, and Donald Trump's uncle was a MIT professor, and he was the one that went to look over Tesla's documents, said I didn't find anything, and then they ended up getting passed down to Donald Trump. So obviously the idea in this book is that I believe it's Baron Trump that designs a time machine, and then they go back in time because they see that there's a civil war if they don't go back and get into presidency. So this is, yeah, it's very interesting. Like the references, it's even like the 5th of November, and they live on like 5th Street, which is apparently the same place at Trump's hotel. There's like, and then the first person that the Trump in the book employs is called Pence. I mean, almost unbelievable for a book that's written 127 years ago. But then when you go into everyone who's pushed out, you're like, well, if there's no time, there's no future, past and present, then was this book written in the past, or did this book just appear because now we have the experience, or was the book a manifestation, and because these people wrote this book somewhere, that idea was put out there into, you know, every time we write a book, the idea is put out there into space to like come in. So it was either a manifestation or it was a change past that this book just appeared and we aligned to that timeline. You know, and there's a few things like with COVID as well. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you knew that I think it was Bill Gates, they ran this massive test thing as if there was a big virus that hit the world only a few years before, and it was an almost exact mirror of what would happen, you know, with COVID. So obviously they put that out there as a thing, and they either manifested it. I think sometimes we blame, and I've been guilty of that, of going, well, they must have created it because look what they put out here. But in the level of manifesting, it could actually just be that it was done in such a real way that it then manifested into time and space and then came through as a timeline. So I don't have all these answers. They're just some possibilities in my weird brain. I'm one of these people where I can't just, live. Like, I always want to know. Like, I want to work things out. I want to get to the bottom of things. And I can see how quantum physics has kind of come to the three main kind of stopping points that are spiritual. Everyone is pushed out, people have. We've all come to like, it's crazy, like just in different languages, we've all got the same kind of three main ideas that we feel it could be. And there's debate on which it is, and that's exactly the same in the quantum world, it seems. So I would love to see more spiritually based, or people looking into quantum physics and vice versa, because I feel there's this I just feel like they would tie it all in together a lot with understanding. But yeah, I'm sure some of you have and have been working on it. So yeah, I'd love to hear everybody's feedback and thoughts on it. And yeah, have a good evening, everybody.